All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Joyce, and thank you all so much for joining us today. I want to welcome you to Elena's first virtual solo exhibition with us. So I Am Art House is a 501c3 nonprofit that supports youth development initiatives and emerging artists globally. So thank you all so much for joining, and we are really excited to host Elaina today. She is a senior attending the University of Oregon. And without further ado, I will let her start her exhibition.
Hello. So this is my artist statement, and pretty much what I am aiming to do is, I make art mostly for my own enjoyment. I don't feel that there needs to be a super deep reason to create all the time. Like if you are a person who just wants to, then you should. I spend a lot of time making resin jewelry, largely because I just like to spend a lot of time outside. And it was a great excuse for me to get out there and collect some plants, preserve them, and make art with them. And originally, it was just that I had seen that art form from other people, and I wanted to learn how to do it. And I was just making it for myself. And then I found that there was interest from other people, so I started selling it and displaying it other places. And there's just been really good feedback from that. So it's been a really awesome hobby and art practice for the last year and a half or so. And I also paint a lot. That is my other medium that I would say is a primary medium. And as far as painting goes, honestly, I like to paint things that I think are kind of funny, or just things that you would not normally be able to see, realism is great. I think it's amazing, and I really respect artists who can perform realism to a T. But I've always found that I got a little bit more out of painting things that you couldn't find in real life, just because it's a great medium to explore those ideas and concepts. And this is a first painting that we're going to show you. This is my final for my last project in a painting course at U of O. This one was actually a tribute to my dog that had passed a few months prior. And I would take her with me a lot when I was going out in the woods and collecting plants for my resin work. And so thus the bluebells, the giant bluebell forest, because originally I was thinking, I want to paint myself and my dog going through a forest. And then was thinking, okay, how can I make this more interesting? Because with paint, you have the ability to make anything whatever you want it to be. So to spice it up a little bit and allow for a more interesting color palette, I decided to go with some more organic shapes and plants, giant plants instead of trees. Or I actually repainted this one like 3 times. When I first started it, I had a color palette that was more it was more neutral, like realistic greens and things, and I was really mad at it and I couldn't figure out why. And I kept trying different shades, adding different things, and it ended up turning into something I really liked, but I hated it for a long time. And it took probably about 65 hours to complete. And this is a piece that I did in a watercolor course. So I was kind of newer at watercolor, but the project was to combine 3 different animals into one. So the snurdster, the snailbird lobster, was the creation from that, and we had to come up with a backstory for the animal and all of that. So in this hypothetical instance, I would say that this animal is about the size of a basketball, and personally, I would be terrified if I ran into this anywhere. Um, I enjoyed playing with the colors in this one as well. I do like the bright, unrealistic colors, honestly, for mostly no other reason than I find it to be visually pleasing and it's fun to do. And watercolor it's not something that I typically use. I would like to experiment more with it in the future, but it has much different qualities than the acrylic paint. It's very transparent, and there's no painting over it, no erasing anything. So if you make a line, that line exists and you have to figure out how to exist with it because that is what it is at that point. Okay. This project is very large in real life. It is 6 feet by 4 feet. It was my first time painting a full body person for some reason. And in this case, it was a ninja. It was because this was a collage project. We were supposed to take 10 different um, images and combine them into one painting. So my dad happened to have these vintage ninja magazines, and I thought, oh, that would be so fun to have a full-sized person because the painting was so large that the person I was painting was actually bigger than I was. Um, and then I wanted to add a COVID ball, as you see the little virus guy up there with the classic mask. And then everything else just kind of fell into place on that one for a completely, not particularly meaningful, but relevant at the time collage painting. So this one, in high school, I had this idea that what if you let go of a balloon and it never popped because I was obsessed with the helium balloons, and I would watch them and watch them and watch them until they either disappeared or they popped. And I used to tie little notes on them, little things, and I had the idea that somebody somewhere was going to find it. And it was this super fun, sweet childhood thing. And in high school, I had tried to do something like this, but I didn't have the skills yet to paint balloons properly. So I tried it again for a really quick project later, just to, pay homage to that childhood concept. And I attached little notes on them showing the balloons as though they had gone fully into space. This one was a tribute to a job that I had for like 3 years. I had this very nasty pair of work shoes. They were so gross. I had beat them to death, basically. I worn them like every day for multiple years, and they were, as you can see in this here, the lining at the bottom was like coming off. And I thought that it was a great picture of what working a job like that is like, because you're working so hard, but you're so broke at the same time. So I thought combining the uniform pieces and the shoes in there that showed that kind of hard work and grit that you use in those kinds of jobs would be a really fun still life. This piece is it's not political. I'm going to throw that out there. It because I know that there's some symbolism that it represents somewhat, but it's unrelated to that. It's just the concept of dirty hands, clean money. And like if you're working a job like a mechanic or things like that, where it's literally like dirty work, but it's hard earned, clean money. This was my first time painting money. A lot of times I find that when I paint something for the first time and it's one of those really kind of tedious things, I'm like, I'm never going to paint this again. But realistically, it's definitely going to happen again. One interesting thing about the way that this was made is I had painted just the hand by itself without the oil or grease on it to start with. And then originally I had gone in with a paintbrush and started to paint on the grease, and I found that it did not have the kind of organic feel that I was hoping for. It didn't look quite right. So I started painting on it with my hands. And that's something that, same with the balloon painting, sometimes it is just your hands are a more effective tool than a paintbrush could ever be. And it really, I feel like, added to that effect of looking like it was actually oil on a hand. This is another piece where I just thought it would be a funny thing to happen. I love manta rays. I think they are super cool creatures, and it's kind of inspired by the way that birds will fly in like a V. And they're kind of bird-like. They have these flappy arm wing thing. So I thought, what if manta rays could just fly out of the ocean in the dramatic bird V? And I wanted to see what that would look like. So I painted it. And conceptually, this is probably one of my favorite pieces. This was just a fun one. There are some things that I find to be recurring subjects in my art for some reason. I think that it's just certain shapes, objects, animals. I find them to be visually pleasing. And so, fun fact, I did have like a pet snail for a lot of years too. So maybe that has something to do with it. But snails and mushrooms, I just kind of like the way that they're interacting in here. And originally there wasn't that kind of weird foggy background, but I thought that it was kind of plain, so I wanted to add something, and I was much more pleased with the balance. And that's another thing that I prefer about having art that isn't really realism focused, is that if you're like, something feels empty here, you can just add colors and shapes and things that wouldn't necessarily happen just because you think it's visually pleasing, and I enjoy that a lot. This is the first piece. Now we're moving out of painting and into some of the resin art. Um, these are little pink like coral bells that I collect all of my plants like in the woods. Like I don't currently grow a flower garden. I'm thinking I might in the future, but I kind of enjoy the hunt for the plants. Um, this particular pressing method that I used for these, I used a book. I find that most of the time I will lean towards the classic pressing flowers in a book method because it doesn't thin the petals out very much. It allows them to kind of shrink a little bit with the drying process, and so their color is often more intense than it would be with some of the other methods. Um, and in this one, because it has the metal frames, that means it was kind of metal frame first, and then you would do your first layer of resin. And while it's still wet, then you can add your greenery or your plants and let that dry, cure. For me, I usually wait between 24 and 48 hours, and then I would do another layer of resin, put that on there, and then there's still that side that was face down when you started, so you'd have to flip it over, clean it up, do the other side. So a minimum of 3 layers. Oftentimes it's more like 5 because something goes wrong and you have to grind it down with like a Dremel tool and start again. In this one, I found that using jump rings was kind of disruptive to the visual of the piece. So with these smaller earrings, because these ones, they're quite small, they're probably the size of a dime. Um, I would drill a hole in the top of the piece and then wire wrap them at the top so that it wasn't as clunky looking. This one is actually a flower from a friend's mom's garden, and it's going to be a Christmas gift later. Sometimes I will nab greenery without people necessarily knowing if it's a gift or from a wedding or things like that, because it's very special. People seem to really like it when they receive things that they've grown. It's a little bit even more special. This frame is also very small. It's even smaller than a dime. Usually with necklaces, I have bigger frames, but these particular ones are very cute, and I do like it if I have flowers that are small enough to fit into them. And this particular one is silver plated, which I generally stay away from things that are anything plated because that means that it has the potential to rub off if it's worn a lot. But there is a line between what is going to still be affordable for your customers and quality. So you have to decide where you're going to draw that line and what your target audience is going to be. This is another pair, and the frames in this particular one, they were actually frames that I had around. I don't know where they came from. You know, that box of random craft stuff that most people have. It was a pair of just empty metal earring frames, and they're pretty large. So I thought that it would be a nice way to display some lavender. Although lavender is an interesting one. So this is also pressed with a book, which sometimes you'll lose little bits with lavender because they're kind of the knobs on them, the little flower pieces, they come off very easily. But this is one of those flowers that will change color in resin. So that's something that I've run into. They tend to be a little bit darker, almost like blackened. Um, but in this particular piece, there were some purple blooms on it that were retained that purple essence, and that was nice. This is a piece that I would like to recreate a few times. I really enjoyed the wooden frames. So most of the time I buy frames like bulk if I can, sometimes from Etsy, sometimes from Amazon. I would like to ultimately make them, but again, that comes down to the amount of time that you are investing into your piece and then what you ask for your piece. Because if you're hand making your frames with metalworking, with in this case woodworking or anything like that, then you have to consider that work time into the price. And I like to try to keep things as affordable as possible for people. Um, this lichen was pressed for the book as well. I really enjoy how that looks with a wooden frame. It's a very woodsy feel. I enjoy this concept. Although I will say, working with these frames, I had a lot of issues with the resin running over and then having to clean it and start again. So sometimes while 3 layers is ideal, oftentimes I've had pieces that took like 10 tries, and you have to keep in mind that each try you have to take that 24 to 48-hour cure time before you can clean it up and try again. So some pieces are more tedious than others, but it's all worth it in the end. And this is one of the more typical frames that I would use. They are stainless steel. So most of the chain, like the chain on this one, is stainless steel. All of my longer silver chains are silver colored chains. I chose that because it won't rub away. It is purely stainless steel. So you're not going to have any issues with having other colors showing through after wearing the chain for a while. It's also it's very sturdy. So I try to make things that you're not going to break when you pull it off or anything like that. These are some of those same coral blossoms that I found. I'm not really sure what the name of them are. They're kind of sticky and strange. I'm sure I've touched a number of plants that I shouldn't have in my time exploring the woods. So it would probably be wise to know what you were grabbing before you did, but I've not always adhered to that concept. In this case, it turned out quite well. This is a pair of earrings. I'm actually wearing one very similar to that. And this is another example of a flower which I asked good friends if I could use it from their garden because they were so beautiful. This is a great example of a plant which I was obsessed with for a while. Sometimes I will see a flower, whether it's a wildflower or flower in someone's garden, and I will just absolutely not stop thinking about it because it's something that I really want to work with, something about the color, the shape, the form. I know exactly what I want to do with it. So if it's somebody that I know, I'll ask them if I can use them. But then there's the issue of like flowers that are in peculiar places, like wildflowers on the side of the road somewhere, but it's a busy road and you have to make that decision of like, how can I get those or can I get those? So some of them, most of the time, I can look at a resin piece and remember exactly where I got the flowers from. So it's kind of an inside joke with myself of where I got everything. But these ones came from the garden of some good friends who are actually in this call here. These ones, another example of a flower I was obsessed with. These yellow, like mustard type flowers. Oh, sometimes it takes me weeks to get the guts to go collect them where they are. In this particular case, they were what people would consider to be weeds, but they were growing outside of the fire station in my local hometown. It's like, oh, I don't want to look like I'm stealing their weeds, but like nobody's going to be upset about you picking their weeds. But it took me a few weeks, and I was so proud when I eventually got them. And these are some more plants that I pressed in a book because I will often try multiple methods, and I will explain more about some of the other flower pressing options. But a lot of times I'll experiment with a flower and try multiple ways to do it. And for this particular one, I think that book pressing was the best. I would someday like to make kind of a guide with my own photo experimentation of different flowers, their technical name, and each of the main 3 or 4 flower preserving methods that I've tried and which one worked best with it. These are some buttercups and leaves from some greenery that I found somewhere. I don't actually remember where the little leaves came from, but they were from just like what you would normally consider to be weeds. If you looked really closely at the ground, I mean, I'm based in Oregon, so there's a ridiculous number of plants if you look anywhere, and you will find all kinds of interesting shapes. And this is a good example of a piece where I will oftentimes use a flower and then leaves from a different flower or a different plant. Because it's kind of like the art thing, like, it doesn't have to be naturally occurring for you to paint it that way exactly, and that's kind of a nice liberty that you have when you're working on this sort of piece. The tiny flowers are some sort of buttercup variety. I do use buttercups a lot, partially because they retain their color better than almost every other flower that I've worked with, and they're just so bright and yellow and cheery. This is a necklace that I made for a friend from her wedding bouquet. So this is another example of flowers that were from a special event that I actually got a bridesmaid to work with me. I was like, "Can I take some of your bouquet?" And she, sure enough, did that. And I usually don't tell people if I'm making something like this, just in case it doesn't turn out well, because it will take a few weeks to complete a piece because of the layering and then life, but also the layers, and then something could go wrong and you have to clean it up and try again. She was very happy when she got this. It's just kind of a nice little memory piece from a special event like a wedding. This is another mixed plant thing. So I like to pair ferns with a lot of wildflowers just because I feel like they're so beautiful. I am a huge fan of ferns. This particular purple flower, it's one of those ones that's a bit bigger. So part of the reason why my frames are tend to be larger, they're about an inch usually in either direction, is because a lot of wildflowers are kind of large. Like the very, very small ones are great, but there are so many beautiful ones that are just a bit bigger. So to capture that beauty, I have to get some frames that are a little bit larger. And this is still another flower that was pressed in the book. This is the first one that was used with multiple methods. So this one's really big. This is like a fairy slipper flower. I was a special request. I had somebody message me saying that their grandma's favorite flower was a fairy slipper, that she adored them and was asking if I could do anything with them. And honestly, I didn't know if I could because the texture of a fairy slipper, it's kind of waxy. It's a little bit like that same like lily-ish texture on flowers. They tend to not do very well. When I press them in a book, usually they almost rot because they're too wet or they just don't keep their color. Or using a microwave press, which is the second method, one of the other methods, sometimes they will burn even if you're very careful about the time that you put it in there. And then powder can sometimes be your best bet with waxy type things. That's usually what I would lean towards. But with this particular flower, it had kind of like a protruding face. I don't if you've ever seen like a fairy slipper, it's sort of like a snapdragon where it has that front part and then the back tuft. So if I just did this in a powder, then it would retain that shape and it would be hard to get in the frame because it would be so big. So with this one, I actually used the microwave press for a little bit, and then before it got to the point where the petals might start burning, then I transferred it to a book and let it dry out the rest of the way like that. And it actually turned out surprisingly well. I was very happy with that, and his grandma liked it very much. These are some big Shasta daisy earrings. I'm a fan of this style personally. I really enjoy wearing these just because they're so big and bright. Daisies are a great example of a flower that needs to be preserved with the very specific method. If you try to press them in a book, then the middle thicker section will be the only part that has contact with the actual pages. So then the petals get spiky, for lack of better terms. So because they're not directly being pressed on by the pressure of the book, they air dry and they end up being very spiky, and it's not quite the look that I was hoping for. But with the powder. It's like a drying powder. I wish I could give you a brand name, but it was actually there was just a big tub of it that we had floating around the house that was specifically for preserving flowers. You can find more information about different kinds of preservation powders online. Um, and you can reuse the same stuff. It doesn't go bad when you use it once, it just dries back out. So daisies are one of those things that do the best. You powder's okay, and the microwave press is actually your best bet with daisies, because the way that a microwave press works, and it's kind of a strange sounding thing. The microfleur is what I use. It's like microfleur. They're a little bit on the spendier side for something you'll be pressing flowers with, but it's really worth it if you want to get into that because it will make contact with the whole flower at the same time. It's got kind of a spongy inside and a few layers, and you kind of moisten the inside of it, and it has clips on the sides. Um, Bye, Amy. It has clips on the sides, and you put it in for like 10-second intervals. It's very tedious. It's a very tedious process. It can take like an hour of like checking on it, taking it out, letting it air out because you don't want them to burn, making sure it's still moist in there. And it can be a little bit hard to tell when your flowers are actually done, but that is the best, most effective way to get flowers or daisies preserved properly. This is a piece that was done with the plants dried in powder. I really love working with mushrooms. They're quite thick though. So with mushrooms, even the smallest ones, they need pretty thick frames. So these wooden ones were pretty good frames, but even then, the actual mushroom itself still went over the threshold of the frame. So I had to work with like the surface tension of the resin, and that oftentimes the resin will run over in that case. And this piece probably took like 8 or 9 layers of resin. So it took quite a long time to complete. And I work on many pieces at once because when you mix the resin, then you're going to have like 2 tablespoons of resin goes a long way when you're working with minimal amounts that go into each. But you also have to work pretty quickly because it will start to cure and then you won't be able to move it around as much or get rid of the micro bubbles when they form when the resin is too thick. So this was one of those very tedious pieces, but I am again a huge fan of wooden frames and I would like to do this kind of design again in the future. This is another plant that was dried with the powder. These are these, I don't know what kind of flower they are. I found them down by the river. They seem to grow very well down by the river. They're pretty large. They're a bit bigger than a quarter and more like a half dollar or something. They're pretty big. And because I dried it with the powder, it retained that kind of curved shape. And with this thicker frame, because I do have some middle frames that are about twice the thickness of the other ones, I was able to do the same thing layering the resin. Um, I think this one came over the top a little bit less, so I was able to do it in probably like 5 or 6 layers, but still a little bit tedious, but worth it. Another mushroom piece. I typically add moss in the pieces with the mushrooms, but sometimes I like the look of like a standalone, you know, it's just its own centerpiece. This one, I distinctly remember this piece because it kept running over where the top, the connection is with the chain, because it kind of moves the resin a little bit. That is a hot spot for the resin to run over, and then you have to go clean it up, try again, but eventually got it to work. These are cherry blossoms. And I love working with blossoms because they have those really delicate, like stamen pieces in the middle. And if you're careful enough, you can gently, I like to dry them in the powder. And when you dry things in the powder, you need to make sure that you kind of layer the powder over the top of them gently. You don't want them to get misshapen at all when they're being dried because they will dry like that. And it'll be kind of hard to get them back to their original shape. Um, with this one, after they're dry, I like to poke down the center of the stamen and try to get them to go to the sides a little bit just so that it doesn't come over the top of the frame as much. And then there's the stainer still in the picture because I think that they're really lovely details of blossoms, and I like to try to keep them in there. These are some toy soldier lichen that I found on trees. So you would be surprised where you can find things. Like I love working with any kind of fungus, any kind of like those weird things. Oregon is a special place for that. You will find all kinds of random things, like a rotting stump is a gold mine. You can find all kinds of tiny mushrooms and just little things that you can put in your other pieces. I liked how bright the red parts were on this because I have found that red is such a difficult color to find naturally occurring in this area. Um, this is one of the brightest, best examples of it. There are a few other red wildflowers I have tried, but a lot of them lose their color when you press them. I try not to use things that do not retain their color well because it will be easier for the person who has it to lose the color, lose the vibrancy of the piece. I want to make jewelry that is easier to take care of, that is more likely to stay bright and vibrant for all the time that they have it. And this is these are really tiny, these little teardrop frames. They are like the size of like my pinky nail. They're very small, maybe a little bigger, but very, very small. And so I drilled a very small hole in them. Sometimes I'll even take a thumbtack and just kind of like twist it through that top because using a drill can sometimes, like if you slip, you'll ruin the piece. And there's really no way to fix that. Um, I have had some fatalities in my resin making, but if I can get a thumbtack through, then sometimes I can get a little bit of wire through quickly enough, and then when I feed it back around, get that same thumbtack through and do it again until I can get enough of a wire wrapped piece that I can attach a little bit of chain for a dangle and the earring hook to it. These were special requested by a friend, and they were the frames that are used for these are so thin. They are so thin, which means that any kind of height of the plant that's going in there is going to rely on building the surface tension of the resin and that drying. So these took quite a few layers. I tend this is probably the biggest mushroom that I could get in such a thin frame, and it was a challenge. I would definitely will be trying it again just because I love working with mushrooms, but I do tend to try to use, like on the right side, the second mushroom, that little guy, that one is probably a more achievable, width for that size of frame, with more success. So I will use more of that size or flatness of a mushroom. This is the first piece that I used a bug in. So that was kind of fun. This was a special request by a woman who keeps bees. And she said, okay, if I bring you some bees that died in the hive, I didn't kill it. Okay. I would not, that's kind of one thing. I wouldn't feel comfortable killing things specifically for resin work because it just feels a little wrong. So it would have to be something that I found dead, but oftentimes when bugs and things die, they don't take on the nicest shapes. So they'll do the leg cross thing or like something that makes them look very dead. But she brought me a tub of bees, and there were about 20 or so bees in there. So some of them looked like they had died in a natural bee form. And this one I chose to put on that big yellow flower that was powder dried. And it was a little bit tedious because this was another one of those ones that came up pretty high. So I had to keep layering the resin. But she was so happy with it when it was done, and she got to have one of her bees in there. And I would like to work more with that kind of thing in the future. I think it would be fun to try ants and butterfly wings is something that I've been experimenting with. Like if you find a dead butterfly, um, using lacquering their wings, just the wing itself, and then making kind of like larger earrings with them. I thought about contacting the butterfly farm and asking them if they had like a season where they were dying. But the only issue I found with that is when you drill through them, there's kind of like it makes a weird air pocket in the wing that you can see, and it doesn't quite look right. So I'm still going to have to find a way to work around that ongoing process of learning. These are some daisies, and these ones were not built out of a frame. So this is another they were microwave pressed. That's why they aren't spiky. They look like normal daisies. Um, but I used a silicone mold for the resin, which is a very popular resin technique. I usually prefer to build out of frames just because I like the look of the frames, but to keep the daisy earrings very light and small for regular size daisies, I found that this particular size of circular silicone mold worked quite well for your like lawn daisy. And they're very light, so most people can wear them because a lot of things, like with the bigger metal frames, I wouldn't use those for earrings very often because most people don't want earrings that are that heavy, and that's very understandable. Here's a little bonus picture of I was doing some photography of this bird piece, and my dog wanted to be featured, so I thought it was a pretty cute picture of an animal interacting there. And I do like working with firms. They work well in these triangular frames. They make great like centerpieces too, but you have to be really careful with the green fading in ferns. I do prefer using books to preserve them. Although newer ferns, like when they're very young, they tend to slightly yellow over time. They are especially important to keep in a dark area. So with this kind of jewelry, you want to keep it in a dark area and then just wipe it off after you use it because you'll get like skin oils on them. So wipe it with a soft cloth, store it in a dark area, and it should be fine. They're not 100%, or I've been told that resin itself is not 100% waterproof. So I wouldn't like swim with them on or shower with them on. It's okay if they get rained on. I mean, this is Oregon. If it wasn't, all my pieces would be destroyed, but they're water resistant. It should be fine. But for the sake of having customers buy jewelry that is um, stays good for as long as they have it, I advise not to wear it in any kind of water and to store it in a dark place. And that's it. Thank you for coming. Does anybody have any questions?
I have a question. Thank you so much, Elaina, for just showing all your incredible artwork. That's just amazing. I'm curious how long the longest piece has ever taken you to make out of like your paintings and your jewelry, and also which ones are your favorite?
Okay, it's got to be the longest piece has to be that painting the pathway to heaven with the dog because I am estimating 60 something hours, but it very well could have been longer. And when you break that into days, say that you worked 5 or 6 hours each day. So if you worked 6 hours each day, that's 10 days you worked 6 hours on a piece. That's a long time. And I had to repaint so many things certain times. And then I also did it in a very like a shorter period of time because it was an assignment. So but I started to care about it. And when I start to care about something, an art piece, then it takes so much longer even. Um, that was probably the most time consuming piece. There was a couple, like there was one night that I didn't sleep even at all. I'm not very good at pulling all-nighters, but I didn't realize that my review was the next morning until that night before. And I had been working on it consistently. I wasn't putting it off. I just didn't, I thought I had at least one more day. So I just stayed up all night. That was one of those energy drink nights. I don't typically drink those, but that night I drank those because you got to do what you got to do. As far as the resin art goes, probably there's a piece I'm still working on actually that has given me so much trouble. And I haven't been able to do much resin work lately because my resin lab, if you will, because it's huge setup. You need so much space for it and storage. I have it at my like hometown. So while I'm at college, I can't really work on it. So I'm not making much from new pieces right now. I do have some pieces that are already completed that I kind of take to the local store, but I'm not making any more actively very much just because each layer isn't a completed piece. It would take, if I were to take like commissions, for instance, right now, it would take months for me to finish it. And I don't feel comfortable putting that long of a wait on customers. So there's a piece though that I'm working on right now. It is with grape hyacinth flowers. They are my favorite flower, my very favorite flower. they're kind of funny looking. I love them, but they're thick, and I preserved them with powder, and they keep running over, and I would be like, oh, just a tiny bit more resin, it'll cover that last little petal. No, that tiny bit more resin, it's running over again, and now you have to flip it and clean it and start over. It drives me crazy. It's been like at least 10 layers at this point, but maybe someday it'll be done. We'll find out. Mm. Any other questions?
I was just curious, after doing that one piece with the bee, I'm a bug person, so I got very excited when I saw that. Do you think you would try to incorporate more insects or like more arthropods into your resin in the future?
I would love to. I think it would be very cool. The hardest part is finding them already dead. There was one, I will admit, one animal that I definitely killed for resin, and it was a scorpion. And it was because it was found in my house. We found a scorpion in the house once. I didn't know Oregon had scorpions, but you can't just leave a scorpion in your house, man. That's not okay. So I wasn't this is terrible. I didn't know, like, how do you kill a scorpion? I don't wanna, because if I crushed it, first of all, scary, because he had the stinger. I mean, every time you looked at him, he'd be up with the stinger. I don't even usually kill spiders, okay? Usually. But anyway, like, I don't know. I feel like bugs, they're little critters. I feel bad about it, unless they're invading space. But, this this scorpion, I ended up freezing him. And it was quick. It was I didn't know how to get him. And then I definitely made him into a keychain for my dad. So
That's
that
awesome.
was,
I
yeah,
mean,
it was big.
if it makes you feel any better, I studied entomology and like the freezer is how most people kill bugs. So you you did the right thing.
Oh, that's great to know in case there's ever an instance that there's something else terrifying that has to die, but it is interesting in form. And we have a question. Do you have paintings in the concept phase right now? Part of what I want to work on in painting right now is a lot of the technical aspects of it. So there are certain things that I just haven't done because um, a lot of times when I paint something, it's the first time that I've painted something. Like with the ninja painting, that was the first time that I painted a whole person. And in fact, people is something that I tend not to do. It's not for any reason in particular other than I'm really fascinated by nature. But I think that for my own personal growth as an artist, it would be really good if I would practice doing some things that I typically wouldn't gravitate towards, like portraits and things like that. Although no promises on realistic colors. But working on my technical skills, I feel like could improve my art in the future of things that I really feel more passionate about. So that's probably what I'll be working on in the future is just technical skills, painting, maybe some animals with hair more, like up close things, working on my realism so that I can focus on my surrealism later. Anything else? Or does everybody have all their questions answered? Okay, I think that's probably good.
All right. Well, thank you so much again, Elena, and thank you so much, everyone, for joining. You can follow Elena's Instagram. You can
It's my
go,
resin page.
yeah.
Woo.
And if you're not following I Am Art House on Instagram or our various social media channels, please do so. And yeah, hope you all have a lovely rest of your weekend.
Mm.